I did my presentation on grounded theory. So before we really dive into the presentation itself, there's a few questions that I want to ask you all that I want you all to kind of think about as we're going through this presentation to help guide your thinking, to help you better understand what grounded theory is. So the first question, why do you think researchers chose grounded theory over using an existing theory? Two, how might a researcher's personal background or bias influence grounded theory research? Three, what are some real life research topics where grounded theory would be especially useful? And then four, do you think it's ever possible to fully avoid preconceptions when conducting grounded theory research? Again, I just want us to kind of be thinking about these questions as we go throughout this. And then at the end, we will review these questions again together. So what is grounded theory? Grounded theory uses data by gathering and examining actual evidence before coming up with a hypothesis and looking into other research on that topic. Grounded theory builds theories by letting the theories develop naturally rather than trying to verify a preconceived notion. This is usually done by interviewing the individuals or the participants. There are some defining features of grounded theory, that being it focuses on a process, action, or interaction that has distinct steps or phases that occur over time. In the end, the researchers seek to develop a theory of the process, action, or interaction. Researchers have to take notes or write down ideas about the evolving theory as the research is going on. And the data and analysis procedures are conveyed in an undertaking at the same time that's repetitive. The inductive procedure involved in data and analysis, data analysis are described in relation to the type of grounded theory approach. And a detailed description of the theoretical model emerging from the data is conveyed. This can take many different forms, including both written and visual representation. So who originally developed grounded theory? So it was originally developed by Dr. Glaser and Dr. Strauss. However, later on, it was redefined by Dr. Corbin and Dr. Strauss. And when they redefined it, they looked at it as more of a systematical procedure, which has more structure, this systematical approach with specific coding procedures, which we're going to talk about the coding procedures in just a little bit, but that's going to be your open, axial, and selective coding. They also look at it as the theoretical sampling. So basically, it's where you start by interviewing some individuals, and then you use the data you gathered and you want to analyze it, and you're going to kind of come to a consensus. And then you're going to use that to help you go back to further research or gather more data. So basically, you're going to gather data, analyze that data, kind of see similarities, and then you're going to take that data, you're going to go back and you're going to get more data. So it is a repetitive cycle, which when we talk about the process of the grounded theory, we'll go into a little bit more depth about the theoretical sampling. It was also redefined by Dr. Charles, and she sees it more as a constructivism approach, which is more flexible, and she recognizes that the researcher's role in shaping the research procedure or process and results. She has more emphasis on the views, values, beliefs, feelings, assumptions, and ideologies of individuals than on the methods of research. And this approach also brings the questions to the data. So there's 5 types of grounded theories that we're really going to kind of dive into. We have the classic grounded theory, the modified grounded theory, constructivism grounded theory, feminist grounded theory, and the postmodern grounded theory. So we're going to start off with the classic grounded theory. So it is intended to be more of a methodology for generating theories than merely an analytical approach. Explaining data and finding new theories, new methods of interpreting the world is the idea. Everything in this case is data, and your process should incorporate fieldwork notes and other literature. It is advised, however, to leave a gap so that existing theories is viewed as something to be questioned rather than being reviewed first, which can introduce bias too early in the research. Um, Along with that, grounded theory, again, like we had said earlier, it's meant to generate rather than verify. So when you are doing grounded theory, you're trying to generate the theory instead of trying to look up something first and then verify that. The ground theory framework the ground theory also focuses on the conceptual core of the data rather than the surface description of the data. Then we have the modified grounded theory, which is the Strauss and Corbin one that they redefined. So this version of grounded theory is more structured and focused on organizing the data. It usually follows a three-step coding process. Again, we're going to talk about in a little bit the open, axial, and selective coding. This method can sometimes see a literature review as limiting because it might influence the researchers with existing theories too early. However, newer and modified versions of grounded theory are often more flexible and action-focused, letting both the researcher and the data shape the final theory more freely. The next one we're going to talk about is the constructivism grounded theory, which is the one that Dr. Charmas kind of introduced. And this approach is where the researcher builds their own interpretations based on the data. So instead of believing that the theory is just waiting to be discovered, she argues that both the researchers and participants shape the theory together through their own views and experience. So this interaction between the two is a key part of the constructivism method. Then we have the feminist grounded theory. So the feminist grounded theory is a way of doing research that uses grounded theory methods while also aiming to challenge inequality, giving voice to women, and exposing power dynamics in society. And then the final one is the postmodern grounded theory. So this is a way of doing research that questions traditional rules. It focuses on multiple truths and encourages creativity, open-ended ways of building theories from data. It challenges the idea of a single objective truth. Instead, it embraces multiple perspectives, uncertainties, and complexity in how people experience the world. So the process that is involved in the grounded theory. So the first thing you do is you're going to go out and you're going to start collecting the data. So you're going to do that before you come up with a hypothesis, before you look at other research on the topic, before you do your literature review. You're going to go and you're just going to go collect the data. Once you have collected the data, you're going to go and you're going to analyze the data, which is where you're going to code it, which again, we're going to talk about in just a second. And then if you look down under the data analyze, it'll talk about the theoretical sampling again. So again, you're going to take the data, you're going to analyze that data, and then you're going to take what you found out from that data and you're going to circle back around and you're going to use what you learned to go get more data. Okay, so the question might be, what was the process? How did it unfold? So that'll be the first round of question that you'll ask. And after you analyze it, then for the theoretical sampling, you're going to take that and you're going to go back to ask more detailed questions this time. So it's a repetitive cycle of collecting data, analyzing data, using that data to go get more data. And then once you have done that, that's when you'll come up with your theory. So the coding. Again, there's 3 steps to the coding: open, axial, and selective. So after you collect the data, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do the open coding. This is where you're going to examine the data line by line, and you're going to compare and assign labels or codes to the different pieces of information. So if you look at the bottom left, I have given you all an example of open coding. So let's say if a student says, "I feel stressed before every game," you might code it as pre-game anxiety. So once you have done the open coding with all of your data, that's when you'll move on to the next step, which is the axial coding. So this is where you group open codes into categories and you look for relationships between them. Again, in the bottom left is another example. So, connecting pregame anxiety with lack of confidence and pressure from coach. So once you have done the open coding and then you move to the axle coding, once you have done that, you move to the last step, which is the selective coding. So the final step, selective coding, is where you identify the core categories that connect all other categories and build a theory around it. So again, in the bottom left, there's an example. So discovering that self-doubt in competitive environments is a core issue affecting performance. So once you've gathered the data, you analyzed it, you coded it, you went through that process, then that's when you'll come up with your theory. There are two examples that I found of people who use grounded theory for their dissertation. The first one, where it talks about a grounded theory of millennials job hopping, I think that is a really good example. He does a really good job at describing like the steps he took and what made it grounded theory. He also talked about in it the theoretical sensitivity that he was worried about, he was concerned about having, and the steps that he put in place to try to make sure that that didn't happen. So that's a really good one. And then the same with the second one, a grounded theory study of navigating the cycle of decline in public school teaching. Again, they did such a good job at really breaking down like what grounded theory is and exactly how they use that and how that looked in their research. So although there are so many great benefits of doing the grounded theory, there are some limitations to it. One being it is an overwhelming amount of data. So again, you gather the data, you analyze the data, you go get more data, and it's just a cycle. So it can be overwhelming and it can also be very time consuming. And then the analyzing can also be difficult. And then there may be some research biased. So back to the questions that we kind of talked about at the beginning. So I want to kind of go over these together. I look forward to hearing your responses as well. And I want to go ahead and give you some of my responses. So why do you think researchers chose grounded theory over using an existing theory? A reason I think that someone might choose to use grounded theory over an existing theory could be there's very little research on that topic already. Maybe they're trying to avoid bias, or they don't want to force data into a preconceived framework. The second question, how might a researcher's personal background or bias influence ground theory research? It can lead them to overlook or dismiss data that doesn't really align with their beliefs, maybe. So again, we all have personal experiences, background knowledge. So I think that does play a role in it. The third, what are some real life research topics where grounded theory would be especially useful? So I think that ground theory approach would be useful in when you are trying to explore the human expressions, social processes, stuff like that. So a question that I kind of came up with that if I was doing a grounded theory would be, how do individuals with anxiety develop personal coping mechanisms over time? I think that would be a really good one to use with the grounded theory. And then the last question, do you think it's ever possible to fully avoid preconceptions when conducting grounded theory research? Personally, no, I don't think it's possible. Again, we all have background knowledge, past experiences, cultural assumptions, different stuff like that. So I feel like it would be really hard to fully eliminate all of those preconceptions. So those are how I would answer the questions. And again, I look forward to seeing y'all's responses. If they differ, if they're the same, I'm really looking forward to that. And then here are my references I used. And I will be uploading the dissertations and the other materials onto the discussion board for you all to look over. If you have any questions, I look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you all so much for watching my presentation, and I hope everyone has a really good day.